The California sun was beginning its descent toward the Pacific when I arrived at the Naval Base Coronado Officers Club private beach. White tents billowed gently in the ocean breeze, their pristine fabric catching the golden light like sails on a fleet of grounded ships. A string quartet played something elegant near the water's edge, their music mixing with the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Crystal champagne flutes caught sunlight and scattered it across white linen tablecloths. The annual summer beach gala was in full swing, and it was beautiful. It was also the last place I wanted to be. I smoothed down my simple navy dress and adjusted the thin strap of my purse. Marcus had texted me 2 hours before the event started. Something came up at work. You understand. Go without me. I understood perfectly. My husband, a lieutenant, was embarrassed to walk into a room full of senior officers' wives with me on his arm. Not because of how I looked or what I wore, but because of who I was. Or rather, who these women believed I was. Just a helicopter pilot. That's what they called me when they thought I couldn't hear, sometimes even when they knew I could. I made my way through the crowd, nodding politely at faces I recognized from 3 years of forced attendance at these functions. Most looked through me as if I were made of glass. A few offered tight smiles that never reached their eyes. I was searching for an empty seat when I spotted the VIP table near the water, its placement clearly designed to signal importance. Admirals' wives sat there, along with the carefully curated inner circle of the Officers' Wives Club. Veronica Ashford Keene held court at the center, her blonde hair swept into an immaculate updo, a diamond bracelet catching the fading sunlight every time she raised her champagne glass. I wasn't heading toward that table. I knew better. But I did need to pass it to reach the general seating area, and that was my mistake. Veronica's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade. "Oh, Mrs. Reyes, looking for a seat." I stopped, turning to face her. Every eye at the VIP table was suddenly fixed on me. Margaret Hollister, the vice president, wore a thin smile that reminded me of a cat watching a mouse. Patricia Wentworth examined her manicure with exaggerated boredom. Diana Cross at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Yes, I began." Veronica waved her hand dismissively, her diamond bracelet throwing fractured light across my face. "This section is reserved for real Navy families, dear, those whose contributions actually matter." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the event space. "I believe there's room near the catering staff. You should be more comfortable there." Scattered laughter rippled through the VIP table. The sound of champagne glasses clinking followed, as if they were toasting to my humiliation. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but my expression remained neutral. 17 years of military training had given me that much. I could keep my face still while my heart pounded against my ribs. I could swallow the words that burned in my throat. My phone buzzed in my purse. A classified number I recognized immediately. I ignored it. "Of course," I heard myself say. "I wouldn't want to intrude." I turned and walked toward the back of the event, my heels sinking slightly into the sand with each step. Behind me, Margaret said something I couldn't quite catch, followed by another wave of laughter. A young woman I didn't recognize caught my eye as I passed her table. She offered me a small, sympathetic smile, but it vanished the moment Margaret's sharp gaze landed on her. The young wife looked away quickly, as if kindness toward me was something that could be punished. I found an empty seat at a table near the catering entrance. The servers gave me curious glances as they passed with their trays of hors d'oeuvres. A busboy refilling water glasses nodded at me with more warmth than anyone at the VIP table had shown in 3 years. My phone buzzed again. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I sat there in my designated place among the invisible, watching Veronica laugh and gesture grandly with her champagne glass, watching these women measure each other by the ranks their husbands wore. They measured me too. They measured my worth by my husband's rank, a lieutenant who couldn't even bring himself to attend this gala by my side. They never asked what I had done in the dark. They never asked about the night missions, the hostile waters, the sound of bullets hitting my airframe while I held steady on the controls. They never asked about the men I had pulled from fire and chaos, the lives I had saved while they were planning charity luncheons and arguing over seating arrangements. I sat alone at my table near the catering staff, and I let myself be invisible one more time. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I wondered if this was what my life had become. A decorated combat pilot, sitting in silence while women who had never heard a shot fired in anger decided that I didn't matter. My phone buzzed a third time. This time, something told me I should answer. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I let the phone fall silent in my purse and allowed my mind to drift backward, through the layers of memory that had led me to this moment. 3 years of small humiliations, of swallowed pride, of making myself smaller so that others could feel larger. I remembered my first day at the Officers' Wives Club like it was yesterday. I had been genuinely excited, if you can believe that. After years of deployments and transfers, I thought settling at Coronado might finally give me a chance to build something resembling a normal social life. Marcus and I had been married for 2 years by then, and he seemed happy that I was making an effort to connect with the community. The luncheon was held at the Officers' Club, all white tablecloths and fresh flowers and women in tasteful sundresses. I wore a simple blue dress that I thought was appropriate. I introduced myself to the group, mentioned that I was a pilot, that I flew Black Hawks for the Pacific Fleet. Veronica had been the first to respond. She looked me up and down with those calculating eyes, her smile never wavering. "How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with something that wasn't quite condescension but lived in the same neighborhood. "My husband commands men, not machines, but I suppose someone has to fly the helicopters." The other women laughed politely. I laughed too, not knowing what else to do. I told myself she didn't mean anything by it. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I was wrong on both counts. Over the following months, the pattern became clear. The Wives Club operated on a strict hierarchy, and that hierarchy was determined entirely by one factor: the rank of your husband. Veronica's husband was a captain, which made her royalty in this small kingdom. Margit's husband was an aide to a rear admiral, which gave her power by proximity. Trish came from old money and had married well, a supply officer with family connections that opened doors. These women had built their identities around their husbands' achievements, and they expected everyone else to do the same. But I had made my own achievements. That was the problem. When they asked about my husband, I told them Marcus was a lieutenant, and I watched their interest evaporate like morning fog. When they asked what I did, I said I was a pilot, and they nodded the way you might nod at a child explaining their finger painting. They didn't ask what kind of missions I flew. They didn't ask about my training or my qualifications. They certainly didn't ask about the commendations that had started accumulating in my service record. "Pilots' wives don't really understand the social demands of Navy life," Margit told me when I inquired about joining the charity planning committee. "It's nothing personal, Alina. We just need women who can commit fully to the work. I'm sure you understand." I understood. I understood that I was being excluded, and I understood that fighting it would only make things worse. Marcus didn't help. If anything, he made it harder. Before every event, every luncheon, every gala, he would pull me aside with the same requests. "Just wear something simple, okay? Don't draw attention." Or, "Maybe don't mention the deployment. These people don't need to know all that." Or, most memorably, right before a promotion ceremony for someone else's husband, "Just don't make it about you tonight, okay? These people know me." He never said it outright, but the message was clear. My career was an inconvenience. My achievements were an embarrassment. In a world where wives were measured by their husbands' ranks, I was supposed to be a lieutenant's wife. Nothing more. So I made myself smaller. I wore simple dresses and spoke in soft tones and never, ever mentioned the classified missions that had taken me to places these women couldn't imagine. I attended luncheons where no one asked where I had been when I was gone for weeks at a time. I smiled at jokes that weren't funny and pretended not to notice when conversations stopped the moment I approached. And all the while, I was living a double life they knew nothing about. I thought about Operation Silent Thunder, the night extraction that still visited me in dreams. The diplomatic personnel had been trapped in a coastal compound, hostile forces closing in from all sides. I had flown my Black Hawk through conditions that would have grounded lesser pilots, navigating by instrument in near-zero visibility, while tracer rounds lit up the sky around us. We pulled 11 people out of that compound. 11 lives that would have been lost if I had hesitated, if my hands had trembled, if I had been anything less than the pilot I had trained myself to become. I thought about the night I had pulled 3 wounded SEALs from waters so hostile that command had initially deemed rescue impossible. The waves had been 15 feet, the wind howling, my co-pilot hit in the shoulder and bleeding onto the instrument panel. I held that bird steady with everything I had, hovering low enough for the rescue swimmer to make the grab, low enough that a single rogue wave could have killed us all. When we finally touched down on the carrier deck, the SEAL team leader had looked at me with something I had never seen before. Not gratitude, exactly. Recognition. He knew what I had done. He knew what it had cost. Admiral Morrison had pinned the commendation on my chest himself, right there on the flight deck with the Pacific stretching endless and dark behind us. "Commander Reyes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the reason those men came home." I remembered the weight of those words, the pride that had swelled in my chest, the certain knowledge that I had done something that mattered, something that would ripple outward through the lives of the men I had saved and the families who would get to hold them again. And then I remembered coming home from that deployment, attending a wives' club luncheon the following week, and sitting through 2 hours of conversation about table settings and fundraiser themes while not a single person asked where I had been. "I heard you were away again," Diana had said, almost as an afterthought, as we were gathering our things to leave. "Yes," I said, "work." She nodded vaguely and moved on, and that was the end of it. I was the only female pilot certified for the Pacific Fleet's most dangerous classified route. I had been mentioned in briefings to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Navy SEALs specifically requested me for high-risk insertions because they knew that when everything went sideways, I would get them home. I had saved 47 lives in a single operation and countless more over the years. But to the Officers' Wives Club, I was nobody. Just a lieutenant's wife who happened to fly helicopters on the side. The irony was almost beautiful in its cruelty. These women spent their days organizing charity events and planning galas and measuring each other's worth by the ranks their husbands wore. And sitting among them, invisible and dismissed, was one of the most decorated combat pilots in the Pacific Fleet. A woman who had faced down death more times than she could count and had never once flinched. They didn't know. They had never bothered to ask. I watched Veronica holding court at the VIP table, her diamond bracelet flashing in the fading sunlight, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something deeper. Something that had been building for 3 years, pressed down and ignored and covered over with polite smiles and quiet compliance. I thought about the men I had saved. I thought about what they would say if they could see me now, sitting at a table near the catering staff, because a woman who had never done anything braver than choose a seating arrangement had decided I wasn't worth knowing. They would be ashamed of me, not for who I was, but for who I was pretending to be. My phone buzzed again in my purse. This time I reached for it. The screen showed a number I knew well, classified, routed through secure channels, but I recognized the prefix. This was coming directly from Pacific Fleet Command. I glanced around. No one was paying attention to me. Why would they? I was invisible, seated among the help, forgotten the moment Veronica had waved me away. I pressed the phone to my ear and answered with the clipped tone I reserved for official calls. "Reyes." "Commander." The voice on the other end was Rear Admiral Catherine Vance, my direct superior, and one of the few people in the Navy who knew the full scope of my service record. Her voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "We have a situation." My spine straightened instinctively. "Go ahead, Admiral." "The Navy Cross ceremony has been moved up. The Secretary of the Navy wants maximum visibility, and there's been a change of venue." She paused, and I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "We're coming to you, Commander." I blinked. "I'm sorry, Admiral, could you repeat that?" "The ceremony is happening today, at your current location. The beach will do nicely for what we have planned." My heart stuttered in my chest. I looked around at the white tents, the string quartet, the VIP table where Veronica was laughing at something Margit had said. The Officers' Wives Club annual summer beach gala. This couldn't be happening. Admiral, with respect, this is a private event. The Officers' Wives Club is hosting their annual gala. I can't just... Commander Reyes, Admiral Vance's voice cut through my protest like a blade. You have spent years hiding in plain sight. You have downplayed your achievements, minimized your service, and allowed yourself to be treated as if you were nothing. I've watched it happen, and I've held my tongue because I respected your desire for privacy. But this ends today. I was silent. My throat had closed around any words I might have found. The men you saved are coming, she continued. The SEALs you pulled from hostile waters, the diplomatic personnel from Operation Silent Thunder. They want to be there when you receive the Navy Cross. They want to honor the woman who brought them home. Are you going to deny them that? I thought about Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hendricks, the SEAL team leader who had looked at me with tears in his eyes on that carrier deck. I thought about the 11 diplomats who had sent me letters I kept in a box in my closet. Letters I had never shown anyone because Marcus didn't like to be reminded that my career sometimes overshadowed his own. Admiral, this will cause a scene. The women here, they don't know about any of this. My husband doesn't even. Then perhaps it's time they learned. Admiral Vance's tone softened slightly. Alina, I've known you for 6 years. I've seen what you can do in the cockpit. I've seen the fire in you when lives are on the line. But I've also watched you shrink yourself down in situations like this, making yourself small so that people who have never sacrificed anything can feel comfortable. It ends today. You've hidden long enough, Commander. These people should see who you are. I closed my eyes. The ocean breeze played with my hair, carrying the sound of waves and the distant melody of the string quartet. At the VIP table, Veronica was holding court, her voice carrying across the beach as she told some story that made the other women laugh. From where I sat, I could see the back of Margit's head, the gleam of Trish's jewelry, the way Diana leaned in to catch every word of gossip. They had measured me. They had weighed my worth on a scale that valued nothing I had ever accomplished, and they had found me wanting. For 3 years, I had accepted their judgment. I had nodded politely and sat where I was told to sit and pretended that their opinions mattered more than the lives I had saved. I thought about the cockpit of my Black Hawk. I thought about the weight of the collective in my hand, the roar of the rotors above me, the absolute focus that descended when everything was on the line. In that space, I knew exactly who I was. There was no confusion, no second-guessing, no making myself small to accommodate someone else's insecurity. There was only the mission and the unwavering certainty that I would accomplish it or die trying. When had I lost that certainty? When had I started believing that the opinions of women who had never faced a moment of real danger were more important than the truth of what I had done? I opened my eyes and looked at Veronica. She was raising her champagne glass, proposing some toast that I couldn't hear. The diamond bracelet caught the light, scattering fragments of brilliance across the white tablecloth. She looked so confident, so secure in her place at the top of this tiny hierarchy she had built. She had no idea what was coming. Commander, Admiral Vance's voice brought me back. I need your answer. Do we proceed? I thought about Marcus, who couldn't even be bothered to attend this gala with me. I thought about his requests that I wear simple clothes and not mention my deployments. I thought about all the times he had asked me to be less than I was so that he could feel like more. I thought about the SEALs who had watched me fly through fire to save them. I thought about Admiral Morrison's words on the carrier deck. I thought about every mission where I had been brave, every night where I had stared down death and refused to blink. And then I thought about this gala, this beautiful, sunlit beach where I had been sent to sit with the catering staff, because a woman who had never done anything worth remembering had decided I didn't matter. Something crystallized inside me, not anger, not revenge, just a simple, clear recognition of the truth. I was done being invisible. I was done making myself small so that small people could feel large. I was done measuring my worth by my husband's rank, by the opinions of women who had never bothered to ask what I had done in the dark. Send them in, Admiral, I said quietly into the phone. I'm done being invisible. There was a pause, and then Admiral Vance laughed. It was a warm sound, full of satisfaction. "Copy that, Commander. ETA 20 minutes. I suggest you find a good seat. You're about to have the best view in the house." The call ended. I lowered the phone and slipped it back into my purse. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. At the VIP table, Veronica was still laughing, still holding court, still completely unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down. I looked out at the Pacific, at the endless blue expanse that had been my home for 17 years. Somewhere out there, a Black Hawk was lifting off. Somewhere out there, Navy SEALs were putting on their dress uniforms. Somewhere out there, an admiral was preparing to tell the world what I had done. And here, on this pristine beach, a woman who had called me invisible was about to learn just how wrong she had been. I didn't move from my seat at the back table. Not yet, but something had changed in the way I held myself, and I could feel it in every muscle of my body. The hunched shoulders, the downcast eyes, the posture of a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible. All of it fell away like a skin I had finally outgrown. I sat straight. I lifted my chin. I let my gaze sweep across the gala with the calm assessment of a pilot surveying a landing zone. 20 minutes. That was all the time I had to prepare for what was coming. My phone buzzed again, and this time I answered without hesitation. It was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, my co-pilot and one of the few people in the world who knew exactly what I was capable of. "Commander, we're wheels up in 5. Admiral Vance wanted me to confirm your position." "I'm at the beach gala, Officers Club Private Beach, Coronado. You'll see the white tents." There was a pause, and I could hear the smile in Sarah's voice. "Copy that. We're bringing your dress uniform." Chief Hendricks insisted on pressing it himself. Despite everything, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. Marcus Hendricks, the SEAL team leader I had pulled from hostile waters, had pressed my uniform. The men I had saved were coming to honor me, and they were treating the occasion with the same care they would give to any sacred mission. "Tell the chief I appreciate it," I said. "And Sarah, it's going to be quite an entrance." She laughed. "I'm counting on it. See you soon, Commander." The call ended, and I slipped the phone back into my purse. Around me, the gala continued as if nothing had changed. The string quartet played a piece I vaguely recognized as Debussy. Servers circulated with trays of champagne and canapés. At the VIP table, Veronica was deep in conversation with Margit, their heads bent together in that conspiratorial way that usually preceded some new piece of gossip or social maneuvering. I watched them with detached curiosity, as if observing creatures from another planet. For 3 years, I had cared desperately what these women thought of me. I had twisted myself into knots trying to earn their approval, their acceptance, their basic acknowledgement that I existed. And for what? They had never seen me. They had never tried to see me. They had looked at my husband's rank and my modest dress and my quiet demeanor, and they had decided that I was nothing. They measured my worth by my husband's rank. They never asked what I had done in the dark. But the dark was coming into the light, and when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same. The first sign that something unusual was happening came about 10 minutes later. I noticed movement at the edge of the beach, near the parking area that served the Officers Club. Black SUVs were pulling in, more than seemed normal for a social event. Men in civilian clothes emerged, but they moved with a precision that marked them immediately as military. Security personnel, I realized. They were establishing a perimeter. A few of the gala attendees noticed too. I saw heads turning, whispered conversations starting. But the string quartet kept playing, and the champagne kept flowing, and most people seemed content to ignore the unusual activity at the edges of their perfect beach party. Veronica, however, had sharper eyes than most. I watched her gaze travel from the parking area to the SUVs to the men positioning themselves around the perimeter. Her brow furrowed slightly, and she leaned over to say something to Margit. A moment later, Margit's eyes found me across the beach. I met her gaze steadily, allowing nothing to show on my face. She whispered something to Veronica, and both women looked in my direction. I was still on my phone when they turned their attention to me. Another call had come in, this one from a junior officer coordinating the ceremony details. I spoke in the clipped, efficient tones I used for all official communication, keeping my voice low but not bothering to hide the nature of the conversation. Confirmed, the podium should be positioned near the water. Yes, the flag too. Standard ceremony protocol. Veronica's voice cut across the beach, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. Well, look who's suddenly so busy. She raised her champagne glass in my direction with a mocking smile. Important pizza delivery, Alina. A few women laughed. I ended my call and looked directly at Veronica, allowing myself a small, enigmatic smile. Something like that, Mrs. Keene. The smile seemed to unsettle her. She wasn't used to seeing me respond with anything other than quiet submission. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could say anything else, a new sound reached us across the water. Helicopter rotors, distant but growing closer. I turned my gaze toward the Pacific, where the sun was now hanging low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I couldn't see anything yet, but I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my bones, the way I always felt it when my aircraft was approaching. Around me, other guests were starting to notice the unusual activity. The string quartet faltered, their music trailing off as they noticed uniformed personnel setting up what appeared to be a small podium near the water's edge. An American flag was being positioned, its fabric catching the ocean breeze. "What on earth is happening?" I heard Trish ask, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet beach. No one answered, no one knew. A young lieutenant approached my table, his uniform crisp and his bearing respectful. He stopped before me and offered a formal nod. "Ma'am, Admiral Vance asked me to inform you that they're 5 minutes out. Your uniform is being brought in now." "Thank you, Lieutenant," I said, rising from my chair. "I'll meet them at the staging area." "Yes, ma'am," he saluted crisply before departing. The salute didn't go unnoticed. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on me as I stood, smoothing down my simple navy dress. At the VIP table, Veronica's champagne glass had frozen halfway to her lips. Margit looked like she had swallowed something sour. Even Diana, usually so passive, was staring at me with undisguised confusion. I walked toward the staging area where the flag had been positioned, and the crowd seemed to part before me without conscious thought. People who had ignored me for 3 years suddenly moved out of my way, perhaps sensing that something had shifted, that the rules of their carefully ordered world were about to change. An aide met me near the podium, carrying a garment bag. Inside was my dress uniform, complete with every ribbon and commendation I had earned over 17 years of service. I took the bag with steady hands. "There's a tent set up for you to change, Commander," the aide said quietly. "Just behind the main pavilion." I nodded and made my way to the changing area, aware that whispers were spreading through the gala like wildfire. I heard fragments as I passed. Did that officer just salute her? What's happening with the helicopter pilot? Why are there so many military vehicles? I allowed myself a small, private smile as I ducked into the tent. They were still calling me the helicopter pilot. In a few minutes, they would understand exactly what that meant. Inside the tent, I changed quickly, with the efficiency of someone who had dressed for ceremonies in far more challenging conditions than a beachside pavilion. The dress uniform felt like armor, each medal and ribbon a testament to battles fought and won. I looked at myself in the small mirror provided and saw someone I barely recognized. Not the invisible woman who sat at back tables and accepted dismissal with polite smiles. Not the diminished wife who wore simple dresses and kept her achievements hidden to protect her husband's ego. I saw Commander Alina Reyes, naval aviator, combat pilot, the woman who had flown through fire and brought her people home. I saw myself, fully and completely, for the first time in years. When I emerged from the tent, the sound of helicopter rotors had grown from a distant thrum to a thunderous presence. I looked up and saw it coming in over the water, silhouetted against the setting sun. My Black Hawk, with my call sign visible on the side. The aircraft I had flown into combat more times than I could count, now carrying the people who had come to honor what I had done. The gala had come to a complete standstill. Guests stood frozen, champagne glasses in hand, staring at the approaching helicopter. The string quartet had abandoned any pretense of playing. Even the servers had stopped circulating, their trays held motionless as they watched the spectacle unfolding before them. At the VIP table, Veronica had risen to her feet. Her face was a study in confusion and growing unease. Margit stood beside her, one hand gripping the table as if for support. Trish had gone pale. Diana was clutching her napkin like a lifeline. I stood near the podium, my uniform crisp in the ocean breeze, and watched my helicopter descend toward the beach. The rotor wash sent sand swirling in golden clouds, forcing nearby guests to shield their eyes and step back. White tent panels billowed and strained against their moorings. It was, I had to admit, one hell of an entrance. And it was only the beginning. The Black Hawk touched down on the sand with the precise control that only comes from thousands of hours of flight experience. I recognized the pilot's technique immediately. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, my co-pilot and friend, handling my aircraft with the same care she would give her own child. The rotors continued their thunderous rotation for a moment before beginning to slow, the noise gradually diminishing from a roar to a steady thrum. The side door slid open, and the first figure emerged. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Hendricks stepped onto the sand in his dress uniform, every metal polished to a mirror shine. Behind him came the rest of his SEAL team, 8 men I had flown into combat, 8 men I had pulled from hostile waters, 8 men who had watched me hold a helicopter steady in conditions that should have killed us all. They moved in perfect formation, their steps synchronized, their faces solemn with the gravity of the occasion. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I held them back. This was not the time for tears. This was the time to stand tall and receive what I had earned. Behind the SEALs came more figures. Rear Admiral Catherine Vance descended from the helicopter with the measured grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. She was followed by Vice Admiral Harrison, commander of the Pacific Fleet himself. The presence of such senior officers sent a visible ripple through the gala crowd. I heard gasps, whispered questions, the shuffle of feet as people unconsciously straightened their posture in the presence of flag officers. But the SEALs weren't finished. More men emerged from the helicopter, faces I recognized from Operation Silent Thunder, the diplomatic extraction that had earned me my first commendation. They were followed by others, men and women whose lives had intersected with mine at various points over 17 years of service. Crew members, fellow pilots, officers who had served beside me and knew exactly what I was capable of. They had all come to honor me. The formation assembled on the beach, creating a corridor that led from the helicopter to the podium where I stood. The American flag snapped in the ocean breeze. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson, as if even nature understood the significance of this moment. Admiral Vance approached the podium, her footsteps deliberate on the wooden platform that had been hastily assembled. She adjusted the microphone, and when she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the now silent beach. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for interrupting your event this evening." Her tone was formal but warm, the voice of someone accustomed to addressing crowds with matters of importance. "We are here on official business, sanctioned by the Secretary of the Navy and the President of the United States. We are here to honor one of your own." I watched the faces of the gala attendees. Confusion had given way to stunned curiosity. At the VIP table, Veronica stood frozen, her champagne glass still clutched in one hand. Margit had pressed herself against the table as if trying to disappear into the white linen. Trish was whispering frantically to her husband, a supply officer whose face had gone the color of chalk. Admiral Vance continued, her voice steady and clear. 17 years ago, a young woman from San Diego joined the United States Navy with dreams of flying. She could have chosen any path, any career, any life of comfort and ease. Instead, she chose to serve. She chose to put herself in harm's way so that others might be safe. She chose to become one of the finest naval aviators this country has ever produced. She paused, letting the words sink in. I felt the weight of every eye on me, but I kept my gaze fixed on the Admiral, on the flag, on the Pacific Ocean that had been my home for so long. Commander Alina Reyes is the highest decorated female combat pilot in the Pacific Fleet. She has led missions that remain classified to this day, missions that saved lives and protected American interests in some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. She has faced enemy fire with unwavering courage. She has made decisions under pressure that would break lesser pilots. And time after time, she has brought her people home. Admiral Vance turned to look at me directly, and I saw something in her eyes that I had rarely seen from superior officers. Pride. Genuine, uncomplicated pride. On March 15th of this year, Commander Reyes led a rescue operation in hostile waters that military analysts had deemed impossible. Enemy forces had surrounded a group of wounded Navy SEALs, cutting off all routes of extraction. Weather conditions were severe: 15-foot swells, near-zero visibility, winds gusting to 50 knots. Command had authorized the mission, but acknowledged that success was unlikely. She paused, and in the silence, I heard the waves breaking against the shore. I remembered that night. I remembered the fear that I had pushed down deep, the absolute focus that had taken its place. I remembered my co-pilot bleeding beside me, the instrument panel slick with her blood, my hands steady on the controls because they had to be, because lives depended on it. Commander Reyes flew into that storm. She flew through enemy fire. Her co-pilot was wounded early in the extraction, but Commander Reyes continued alone, holding her aircraft steady in conditions that would have forced most pilots to abort. She executed a hover extraction at an altitude of 20 feet, low enough that a single rogue wave could have destroyed her helicopter and killed everyone aboard. The Admiral's voice grew quieter, more intense. She held that position for 7 minutes while the rescue swimmer retrieved 3 wounded SEALs from the water. 7 minutes of absolute precision, absolute control, absolute refusal to give up on the men she had come to save. I thought about those 7 minutes. I thought about how time had seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, how every second had felt like an hour, and yet the whole thing had passed in a blur. I thought about the moment when Chief Hendricks had been hauled aboard, his eyes meeting mine through the cockpit glass, the wordless gratitude that had passed between us. Commander Reyes saved 3 lives that night, Admiral Vance said. But that was only one mission among many. Over the course of her career, she has saved 47 lives in documented operations and countless more in missions that remain classified. She has flown extraction runs that other pilots refused. She has gone into danger again and again, not for glory or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising. The Navy Cross is the second highest decoration that can be awarded to a member of the naval service. It is given for extraordinary heroism in combat. It is not given lightly, and it is not given often. Today, by order of the President of the United States, I am honored to present this decoration to Commander Alina Reyes. Chief Hendricks stepped forward from the SEAL formation. In his hands, he carried a small velvet box. His eyes were bright with unshed tears as he approached, and I saw his hands trembling slightly, the only sign that this moment affected him as deeply as it affected me. He stopped before me and opened the box, revealing the Navy Cross nestled in dark velvet. The metal caught the light of the setting sun, its bronze surface gleaming with the weight of history and sacrifice. "Commander Reyes," Chief Hendricks said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was one of the men you pulled from the water that night. I was wounded, bleeding, certain I was going to die in those waves, but you came. You came through the storm and the enemy fire, and you held your bird steady until we were safe." He paused, swallowing hard. "You pulled me out of hell, ma'am. I wouldn't be standing here without you. None of us would." He lifted the medal from the box and stepped forward to pin it to my uniform. His hands, which could field strip a weapon in seconds, were gentle as they secured the decoration above my heart. When it was done, he stepped back and snapped to attention. His salute was crisp, perfect, delivered with the precision of a man who understood exactly what he was honoring. Behind him, the entire SEAL formation saluted as one. The sound of their boots striking sand in unison was like a heartbeat, like thunder. like the roar of rotors that had carried us all through fire and darkness. Admiral Vance saluted. Vice Admiral Harrison saluted. Every uniformed person on that beach snapped to attention and raised their hand to their brow. I returned the salute, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of terror pushed down and controlled so that I could do what needed to be done. Tears streamed down my face now, and I didn't try to stop them. Some moments were too big for composure. Some moments demanded the full expression of what they meant. Behind the formation, my Black Hawk crew stood at attention. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, my co-pilot, was crying openly. The crew chief who had been with me on a dozen dangerous missions had removed his cover and was holding it over his heart. They were my family, these people. They were the ones who had seen me at my best and my worst, who had trusted me with their lives and been trusted with mine in return. I looked past them to the gala guests, still frozen in stunned silence. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments. Servers stood with trays held forgotten at their sides. And at the VIP table, the Officers' Wives Club was experiencing something they had never anticipated. The woman they had dismissed, as nobody was receiving the Navy Cross. The helicopter pilot they had sent to sit with the catering staff was being saluted by admirals. Veronica's champagne glass finally slipped from her nerveless fingers, falling to the sand without a sound. Her face had gone from pale to ashen, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from having your entire worldview shattered in a single moment. Margit was gripping the table so hard her knuckles had gone white. Trish looked like she might faint. Diana had buried her face in her hands. And across the beach, the young wife who had offered me a sympathetic smile, the one Margit had silenced with a glare, was openly weeping. But these were not tears of shock or shame. They were tears of joy, of vindication, of watching injustice be spectacularly corrected. I stood at attention as the applause began. It started with the SEALs, a rhythmic clapping that spread to the other military personnel, then rippled outward to the gala guests. Not everyone joined in, some were still too stunned to move, but the sound grew until it filled the beach, mixing with the crash of waves and the cry of seabirds. I had spent 3 years being invisible. I had spent 3 years making myself small. Now the whole world could see exactly who I was. The applause subsided, and the ceremony shifted into something less formal. Admiral Vance and Vice Admiral Harrison offered personal congratulations, and the SEALs broke formation to approach me one by one, each man offering a handshake or a salute or simply a moment of eye contact that communicated more than words ever could. Chief Hendricks lingered after his team had paid their respects. "Commander," he said quietly, "I've been waiting 3 years to see this. Every time I heard what those women said about you, I wanted to tell them exactly who they were disrespecting. It wasn't your fight, Chief." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but you saved my life. You saved all of our lives. That kind of injustice doesn't sit well with me." He allowed himself a small smile. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Always." The look on that blonde woman's face when the Admiral started reading your service record. Worth the flight out here all by itself. I laughed, a genuine laugh, the first in longer than I could remember. It felt like pressure escaping from a valve sealed too tight for too long. The crowd began to shift and circulate. People who had ignored me for 3 years were suddenly desperate to catch my attention. Faces that had looked through me now sought my gaze with eager, almost desperate smiles. I accepted their congratulations briefly, offering nothing more than a nod and thank you before moving on. I had no interest in collecting admirers who had only discovered my worth when admirals announced it. Their belated respect meant nothing. But for others, genuine people who had been kind when kindness was costly, I had time. I found the young wife who had smiled at me earlier, standing uncertainly at the crowd's edge. "What's your name?" I asked. She startled. "Lieutenant Commander Harris, ma'am. Jessica Harris, my husband is." "I don't need to know your husband's rank," I said gently. "I asked your name, not his." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "I'm so sorry for how they treated you. I should have said something. You smiled at me when no one else would. That took courage, given your company. Don't underestimate small acts of kindness. They matter more than you know. She nodded, wiping her eyes. You're incredible, ma'am. I placed a hand briefly on her shoulder before moving on. And then there was Veronica. I saw her approaching, having composed herself somewhat, though her face still carried the pallor of profound shock. Her steps were hesitant, a far cry from her usual confident stride. Margit and Trish flanked her, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Deanna trailed behind, her eyes red and swollen. Alina, Veronica's voice was strained. We had no idea if we had known. I held up a hand, and she fell silent immediately. The gesture would have been unthinkable an hour ago. Mrs. Keene, I said calmly, I'm not interested in explanations or apologies. But surely you understand. The classification, we couldn't have known. You could have asked, I said simply. In 3 years, not one of you ever asked what I did. Not one of you showed the slightest interest in who I was beyond whose wife I happened to be. You didn't need security clearances for basic human curiosity. Veronica opened her mouth, then closed it. For perhaps the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. I looked at each of them in turn. Margit, who had spread gossip and orchestrated my exclusion. Trish, who had sneered at my modest dress. Diana, who had laughed at jokes at my expense because it was easier than standing alone. You built a world where women are measured by their husbands' achievements, I said. You created a hierarchy based on borrowed glory and enforced it with cruelty, with exclusion, with casual humiliation that leaves scars people don't talk about. I paused. I'm not angry. I'm not seeking revenge. But understand, there were other women at your luncheons, your galas, your events. Women you dismissed because their husbands didn't have the right rank. Women who might have been extraordinary in ways you never bothered to discover. Veronica's lower lip trembled. I never meant. You never thought about it at all. That's the problem. You never considered what it might cost someone to be deemed invisible. I straightened my jacket, feeling the Navy cross against my chest. I hope you'll think about it now. I hope the next time you're tempted to measure a woman's worth by her husband's rank, you'll remember this moment. I offered a small, polite smile. Mrs. Keene, I hope you enjoy the rest of your gala. I turned and walked away, leaving them in stunned silence. I heard Margit start to speak, but Veronica shushed her with a sharp hiss. I was accepting congratulations from Vice Admiral Harrison when I sensed a familiar presence. I turned to find Marcus standing at the crowd's edge, still in civilian clothes, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. He had arrived late. Of course he had. Alina, his voice was barely above a whisper. What is all this? Why is the Pacific Fleet here? Why are you in dress uniform? I excused myself from the Vice Admiral and approached my husband. The crowd parted before me, and I was aware we had become the center of attention again. Marcus, I said, you missed it. Missed what? He looked around wildly, taking in the military personnel, the podium, the flag. His eyes landed on the Navy Cross and his face went pale. Is that? The Navy Cross, presented by Rear Admiral Vance and Vice Admiral Harrison, for extraordinary heroism in combat. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. And perhaps he was. This was not the diminished wife who wore simple dresses and kept quiet about her deployments. This was Commander Alina Reyes, combat pilot, decorated hero. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked. I didn't know. You never asked, I said quietly. In 5 years of marriage, you never once asked about my missions. You asked me to downplay my career, not to mention my deployments. You were so worried about how my achievements might make you look that you never bothered to find out what those achievements were. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Alina, please, we can talk about this. We'll talk at home, I said firmly, but not unkindly. There was no point in humiliating him further in public. He nodded miserably, and I turned to rejoin the admirals and SEALs who had become my true family. A reporter had somehow made her way onto the beach. Someone had tipped off the press. and she approached with a microphone and cameraman. "Commander Reyes, how does it feel to finally be recognized for your extraordinary service?" I considered the question. I didn't do any of it for recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because lives were on the line and I had the ability to save them. But surely, this moment must be meaningful, after years of having your achievements remain classified. I looked at the gala guests, still processing what they'd witnessed, at the women who had dismissed me now standing silent and shaken, at my crew and Chief Hendricks and Admiral Vance. "I've learned something today," I said slowly. "For years, people measured my worth by my husband's rank. They never asked what I had done in the dark. They never asked about the missions, the sacrifices, the moments when everything was on the line." I paused. Some things can only be understood in the light. Today, the light finally found me. The reporter seemed moved, and I saw the cameraman wipe at his eye. But I had said all I intended to say. I nodded politely and stepped away, returning to people who had known my worth all along. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and photographs. I posed with the SEAL team, with Admiral Vance, with my crew. I accepted congratulations from junior officers who looked at me with something approaching awe. Throughout it all, I was aware of the Officers' Wives Club watching from the periphery. Veronica had retreated to the VIP table, which suddenly seemed far less important than it had an hour ago. Margit had disappeared entirely, fled to her car, someone said. Trish was having what appeared to be a tense conversation with her husband, who kept glancing at me with an expression of deep discomfort. Only Diana approached me again as the evening wound down. She stood before me with tears still streaming down her face, making no effort to hide them. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I was a coward, and I let them treat you terribly, and I'm sorry." I studied her for a moment. There was something genuine in her distress, something that distinguished her from the others. She wasn't apologizing because she'd been caught. She was apologizing because she was ashamed. "Thank you, Diana," I said. "That means something." She nodded, wiping at her eyes, and turned to walk away. But she paused after a few steps and looked back. "You're incredible," she said quietly. "I always thought so. I just didn't have the courage to say it." Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd, and I was left to contemplate the strange alchemy of this evening. The humiliation that had become triumph, the invisibility that had become undeniable presence, the woman who had made herself small finally standing at her full height. As the sun finished its descent and the sky deepened into shades of purple and navy, I knew it was time to go. The gala continued around me, but its energy had fundamentally shifted. What had been a celebration of social hierarchy had become something else entirely, a gathering of people still trying to process what they had witnessed. Admiral Vance approached me one final time. "Your aircraft is ready, Commander. We thought you might want to make an exit as memorable as your entrance." I smiled. "Permission to fly her home myself, Admiral." "I wouldn't have it any other way." She returned my smile with one of her own. "You've earned this moment, Alina, every part of it. Don't let anyone diminish what happened here today." "I won't," I promised. "Not anymore." I made my way across the beach toward the Black Hawk, still resting on the sand where it had landed. My crew was already aboard, running through pre-flight checks. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen vacated the pilot's seat when she saw me approaching, moving to the co-pilot position without a word. The SEALs formed an honor guard as I walked, standing at attention on either side of my path. Chief Hendricks was at the end of the line, and as I passed him, he spoke quietly. "Fair winds and following seas, Commander." "Thank you, Chief, for everything." I climbed into the cockpit and settled into my seat. The familiar controls surrounded me like an embrace, and I felt something unclench in my chest. This was where I belonged. This was who I was. "Ready when you are, Commander," Sarah said from beside me. I looked out through the windscreen at the beach, at the white tents now illuminated by strings of fairy lights, at the crowd of faces turned toward my helicopter. I could pick out individuals even at this distance. Vice Admiral Harrison, standing at attention. The young wife, Jessica Harris, waving with unabashed enthusiasm. The SEAL team still in formation. And at the VIP table, Veronica Ashford-Keene, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read from this distance, but could easily imagine. I started the engines. The rotors began to turn, slowly at first, then building to their familiar thunderous rhythm. Sand swirled beneath us, and tent panels billowed in the downdraft. Guests stepped back, shielding their eyes, but none of them looked away. I lifted the collective, and the Black Hawk rose smoothly from the sand. For a moment, I hovered there, suspended between the beach and the darkening sky. I could see everything from this vantage point. The gala laid out below me like a diorama, the Pacific Ocean stretching endless and dark to the west, the naval base glittering with lights to the north. Then I banked the aircraft and headed out over the water, climbing steadily into the evening sky. I didn't look back. The conversation with Marcus happened 2 weeks later, in the living room of the house we had shared for 3 years. I had spent those 2 weeks staying on base, giving both of us time to think, to process, to understand what came next. He looked older than I remembered when I walked through the door. Tired, with dark circles under his eyes and a tentative uncertainty in his posture that I had never seen before. "Thank you for coming," he said, as if I were a guest in my own home. "We needed to talk." He nodded, gesturing toward the couch. We sat at opposite ends, a careful distance between us. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything, about the gala, about our marriage, about—" He trailed off, searching for words. "I didn't know, Alina. I swear I didn't know about the Navy Cross, about the classified missions, about any of it." "I know you didn't," I said quietly. "That's the problem." He flinched as if I had struck him. "I should have asked. I should have paid attention. I was so wrapped up in my own career, my own insecurities, that I never stopped to see what you were accomplishing." "You didn't want to see it," I corrected gently. "Every time I tried to tell you something about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I came home from a deployment, you asked me not to talk about it. You wanted me to be smaller, Marcus. You needed me to be smaller so that you could feel like the successful one in this marriage." He dropped his head into his hands. "I know, God, I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Alina. Is there any way we can start over? I can change. I can be the husband you deserve." I had thought about this moment during those 2 weeks on base. I had imagined different versions of this conversation, different outcomes, different futures. But in the end, only one answer felt true. "I can't, Marcus. I'm sorry, but I can't." He looked up, his eyes wet. "Please." "I flew into combat zones for this country," I said, and my voice was steady even as my heart ached. "I faced down enemy fire and impossible odds, and I never flinched. But I came home to a marriage where I had to fight to be seen, where I had to make myself invisible to keep the peace." I paused, letting the words settle. I shouldn't have to fight to be seen in my own marriage. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of 5 years and all the things we had never said. "I've already filed for separation," I continued. "My lawyer will be in touch about the details. I'm being transferred to a new command position. I'll be training the next generation of combat pilots. It's a fresh start. I think we both need one." He nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I always knew you were extraordinary. I just didn't know how to live with it." "That's the saddest thing you've ever said to me," I replied. "Because you never had to live with my achievements. You just had to love me. That should have been enough." I stood and walked toward the door. There was nothing left to say. The weeks that followed brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Veronica Ashford-Keene quietly stepped down from the Wives Club presidency, citing personal reasons. Margaret Hollister transferred with her husband to a posting on the East Coast. The social hierarchy that had seemed so impenetrable began to shift and reform, with Jessica Harris, the young wife who had offered me a smile, emerging as an unexpected voice for change. Letters of apology arrived at my new address, forwarded from the base. I recognized the handwriting on some of them, women who had laughed at Veronica's jokes, who had looked through me at luncheons, who had measured my worth by my husband's rank. I didn't read any of them. The time for apologies had passed, and I had no interest in offering absolution to ease their consciences. But one piece of mail made me pause. A small envelope with a child's drawing visible through the paper. I opened it carefully and found a photograph inside. It showed a little girl, perhaps 4 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes. She was wearing a child's flight suit and a pair of toy pilot wings pinned to her chest. Her smile was enormous, joyful, full of possibility. On the back of the photo, Chief Hendricks had written, "My daughter Emily. She wants to be a pilot when she grows up. She wants to be like you." I stared at the photograph for a long time, feeling something swell in my chest that was neither pride nor sadness, but something in between. A recognition, perhaps, that the ripples of our lives extend further than we can ever know. 6 months later, I found myself in the cockpit of my Black Hawk at sunrise, flying a training mission off the California coast. The Pacific Ocean stretched endless and golden beneath me, painted in shades of amber and rose by the rising sun. My new trainees, 3 young pilots who had specifically requested assignment to my unit, sat in the back, absorbing everything they could. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the years of service, the classified missions, the lives I had saved, the 3 years of invisibility at the Officers' Wives Club, the gala that had changed everything, the marriage I had finally found the courage to leave. I thought about Veronica and her diamond bracelet, about Marcus and his insecurities, about all the people who had measured my worth by metrics that had nothing to do with who I truly was. And I thought about Chief Hendricks' daughter, with her toy pilot wings and her enormous smile. The sun broke fully over the horizon, flooding the cockpit with golden light. I felt it warm my face, felt it illuminate the metals on my chest, felt it chase away the last shadows of the invisible woman I had once been. I had been flying through darkness for so long, I forgot that I was the one bringing the light. But I remembered now, and I would never forget again.